The White House makes its move. No warning, no buildup, just an executive order signed, sealed, and released into the financial bloodstream. On paper, it sounds technical, suspending correspondent banking relationships for 6 of Canada's largest banks. Clean language, clinical, but don't let that fool you. What it actually means is brutal. Overnight, those banks lose the ability to move US dollars through American institutions. No clearing, no settlements, no wire transfers, nothing. Translation, you choke the dollar, you choke the system, and Washington knew exactly what it was doing. These aren't small players. We're talking about institutions holding nearly $5 trillion in assets, deeply embedded across the U.S. economy, branches up and down the East Coast, millions of American customers, regular people, families, retirees, small business owners who wake up tomorrow morning and suddenly their money is frozen. Think about that. You go to the ATM, nothing. You try to pay your mortgage, blocked. Transfer money denied. Not because your bank failed, not because you did anything wrong, but because 2 governments decided to play financial chicken and you're caught in the middle. And here's where it gets even more aggressive. The order didn't stop at banking access. It instructed regulators to start reviewing Canadian bank listings on U.S. stock exchanges with the option to halt trading entirely if they deemed it a systemic risk. That kind of language is usually reserved for hostile regimes, not allies, not neighbors, not countries that have fought alongside American soldiers for generations. But in that moment, none of that seemed to matter. Inside the Oval Office, the calculation was simple and brutally confident. Cut Canada off from the dollar system, and they collapse. We're talking about roughly $400 billion in US dollar transactions every single month. Shut that pipeline down, and according to the thinking in Washington, Canada's economy grinds to a halt. Trade freezes, markets panic, pressure builds, and within 48 hours they come crawling back. That was the plan. Raw power, pure leverage. The belief that whoever controls the dollar controls the outcome. For decades, that logic worked, but this time they didn't just pick a fight with a country. They picked a fight with the one man on earth who knows exactly how to break that system from the inside. 1:58 p.m. Eastern, just under 2 hours after Washington fired the first shot, the response came. Not from a war room, not from a politician scrambling for damage control, but from a man who has spent his entire life mastering crises exactly like this. Mark Carney stepped up to the podium in Ottawa. No hesitation, just absolute control. And if you didn't know who he was, you might have missed just how dangerous that moment really was. This isn't some career politician playing economic games. This is the man who steered Canada through the 2008 financial crisis without a bailout, while the rest of the G7 was on life support. The same man who walked the Bank of England through Brexit chaos without letting the system collapse. The guy central banks call when everything is on fire. And today, he was ready. He started calmly, almost surgically, laying out exactly what the United States had just done. He called it what it was, weaponizing the dollar system, the same tool America uses against Iran, against North Korea, against its enemies. Then he said something that cut straight through the noise. The president has decided to treat Canada as an enemy. Let that sink in. Not a partner, not an ally, an enemy. And then came the moment, the line that will be replayed, studied, and debated for decades. Canada will now sell its U.S. Treasury holdings. 7 words. That was it. But behind those 7 words, over $300 billion in U.S. government debt suddenly on the table, ready to be dumped into the global market like a tidal wave aimed directly at the foundation of American financial power. This wasn't retaliation. This was strategy. Because Carney didn't stop there. In fact, that was just the beginning. Within the same announcement, he revealed that Canada had already activated emergency swap lines with Europe, Japan, the United Kingdom, even China. Let that sink in. While Washington was trying to lock Canada out of the dollar system, Canada had already built a backdoor network to bypass it completely. Euros, yen, pounds, yuan, transactions keep flowing, banks keep operating, trade doesn't stop. In one move, Carney neutralized the very weapon the United States thought would bring Canada to its knees. And here's the part that should make policymakers in Washington very uncomfortable. This wasn't a reaction. This was premeditated. These deals weren't made in the last 2 hours. They were lined up days, maybe weeks in advance. While Washington believed it held all the cards, Carney was quietly reshuffling the entire deck. So when those 7 words hit the airwaves, it wasn't a bluff. It was a warning shot backed by a plan, and within minutes, the markets understood exactly how serious it was. Then the market snapped, not slowly, not cautiously, instantly. Within minutes of Carney's statement, the US dollar started dropping like a rock, down over 3% in a single session. That kind of move, you don't see it unless something is seriously broken. At the same time, US Treasury yields spiked hard. The 1-year jumped toward 5%. The 30-year blew past levels that make mortgage lenders sweat. And if you think that's just Wall Street noise, think again, because this is where it hits home. Higher Treasury yields mean higher borrowing costs across the board. Mortgages, car loans, credit cards, everything gets more expensive. Overnight, analysts started warning that the average American mortgage payment could jump by hundreds of dollars a month. Not next year, not someday, within days if this keeps escalating. So while Washington was trying to teach Canada a lesson, American families were the ones getting hit in the wallet. Let that sink in. And it didn't stop there. Bank stocks were hammered. Major U.S. financial institutions dropped between 8% and 11% in a matter of minutes. Investors weren't just reacting to Canada, they were reacting to the realization that the entire system suddenly looks fragile. Because here's the uncomfortable truth no one in power wants to say out loud. The United States just used its financial system like a weapon against a loyal ally, and markets are now asking, who's next? Gold answered that question immediately. It surged to record highs as money fled the dollar and ran for cover. When gold spikes like that, it's not optimism, it's fear, pure, unfiltered fear. And right at the center of that fear is one brutal realization. America just got hit at its weakest point: debt. See, the US doesn't just run on power, it runs on borrowing, trillions every year. And that system only works because the rest of the world trusts the United States enough to keep buying its debt. But what happens when that trust cracks? What happens when countries start thinking, if they can freeze Canada, they can freeze us too? That's exactly the signal Carney just sent. And suddenly, it's not just about $300 billion in Canadian holdings anymore. It's about every central bank, every government, every investor around the world quietly asking the same question: should we still trust the dollar? Because if the answer starts shifting even a little, the consequences won't be temporary, they'll be permanent. But here's the part that should really make you pay attention. This crisis isn't just about markets or bonds or currencies, it's about what happens next. And there are only 3 ways this can end. Scenario 1, Washington blinks. The backlash hits fast and hard. Millions of Americans wake up locked out of their own bank accounts. Governors, attorneys general, members of Congress, they start lighting up the White House. Lawsuits pile up overnight. The political pressure becomes unbearable. Within 48 hours, the administration quietly walks it back, claiming victory, saying the message was sent. But here's the truth they won't say out loud. The damage is already done because Canada doesn't just forget. Those swap lines stay in place. That alternative system is now real. It exists, and every other country just watched it work. The dollar keeps its throne, but the cracks are visible for the first time. Scenario 2, nobody backs down. Canada starts selling, not all at once, but enough. $30 billion a week, maybe more. Yields climb 5.5%, 6%. Who knows where it stops? Mortgage rates shoot past 8%. The housing market freezes solid. Stocks slide into a full-blown bear market as borrowing costs crush growth. Then the Federal Reserve steps in, printing money, buying bonds, trying to hold the line as the world starts stepping back. Inflation flares up again, the dollar weakens further, and suddenly, this isn't just a financial fight anymore. It's a domestic crisis, a political firestorm that consumes everything in its path. And then there's scenario 3, the one nobody wants to admit is possible, but might already be in motion. The world adapts. Canada proves you can operate outside the dollar system and survive. Energy trade starts shifting. Euros, yuan, bilateral deals. Other countries take notes quietly, strategically. Over the next 12 to 18 months, the unthinkable begins to happen. Not a collapse, but a migration, slow, steady, irreversible. The dollar doesn't disappear, but it stops dominating. It becomes one of several pillars instead of the foundation itself. Borrowing costs in the United States rise permanently, not because of a crisis, but because trust, once broken, doesn't fully come back. And that's the real story here. This was never just about Canada. It was about trust. For decades, the power of the US dollar wasn't just backed by military strength or economic size. It was backed by one simple belief that America wouldn't turn the system against those who play by the rules. Today, that belief took a hit, and it didn't come from Beijing. It didn't come from Moscow. It came from Washington. And one central banker turned prime minister just showed the entire world exactly what happens when that trust is broken. Please hit the bell icon and subscribe to my channel for daily updates.